This was a project that started as nothing more than a quick demonstration for my Illustration 384, which is painting the real and the imagined. In this case, we're designing a character from Project One, which is for mythic fiction book cover. It's a wide range, and I'm trying primarily to share with my students the idea of changing sizes of characters to make them believable within your narrative, your fiction. And in the process, I want them to understand that you will work from your imagination to start with. But also you should utilize reference, something real life, observation, to be able to feed that idea. So at this point I decided I'm going to save this as a video demonstration at the same time. So I started a screen capture. Sorry you didn't see the initial blocking in stages. But it was a lot of what you would do in your own classes, what you would do with your own projects. You start, you stop, you erase a leg, you change things, you give it a different idea. And then from there, I started squatting the body, making sure that my proportions looked correct. Proportions in this case of a dwarf Hobbitt character. So his head is much bigger in proportion to his body, but his hands also and his feet, as you know, described in the story, are much bigger than they would be in proportion to a normal size human being also. So here I'm just making sure the proportions work out. I'm drawing digitally, and we're working in Photoshop, which has become the industry standard. And I want you to be able to understand that as a traditional artist, someone who has built most of their career drawing and painting traditionally, I approach my digital work the same way. I try to build my image much the same way I would if I were painting it with traditional mediums. In this case, I'm working with a digital brush that resembles charcoal. I'm working on a background of one of my scanned textures of an old parchment paper, things that I've kept in my files for years, and now they serve double duty. I've scanned them in, I can use the texture to paint on top of, and by itself gives the appearance as if I'm painting or drawing, laying in my drawing with charcoal. After I make adjustments, the one thing I must say, as you just saw an example there, is that digital drawing and painting gives me so much more capabilities than the traditional approach would. I can quickly select an area, enlarge an area, reduce an area, move an area, change it, bring it back into it so much faster than I would have to do it in the traditional method of erasing, reworking, drawing out, starting over again. And it really does bring out the ability to think on the fly much quicker, to respond. You can see me using my reference here for facial expressions, for facial structure. Up until this point, it's been kind of based on just my own imagination. Found something quickly to use as reference to work by. And again, this is something that every artist since all the way through history. We knew Michelangelo did it, we know Da Vinci did it. If they had photography, they would use photography. They didn't. They had live models, so they brought live models into the studio to work from. We're doing the same thing. Being an illustrator, we're forced to work on a much tighter deadline. The whole painting you're seeing here from start to finish after class literally took about 4.5 hours. It's been drastically time reduced for this video for you to take a look at. And I will cut through and come in and out from time to time just so you can see things that I think are of importance. In this section, I'm showing a little of the transition of how I started applying color. This was nothing more than in-class demonstration of how I would paint with digital paintbrushes to emulate an approach as if I were going to paint it with oil. Much like I would paint in traditional medium, I first lay in a undertone painting. I will show that a little bit more in depth at the next clip in the transition change, but I wanted to be able to at least tell you what was happening here. It's not the drastic jump you see. It was part of something I was doing specifically for demonstration purposes, not thinking of this at the time as anything more than show and tell on how I would approach a painting. At the beginning of this transition, I've decided why not go ahead and finish this and start making this a painting. So what you saw me do instantaneously right there was nothing more than create a backdrop. As an artist, I prefer not to work on a white background. Some artists do. I enjoy seeing my paintings, my creations have volume to them, have depth, have weight to the images, the characters themselves. And over time, I've learned that white as a background is so hard to judge color and value by that I would rather work on a value or toned canvas or surface. It was already gray, but I wanted to bring in the idea of light sources, a warm light versus a cool light. So what I did was on a separate layer, underneath the layer that you saw where I had already started painting the cloak, I laid in a new layer, put in a color transition layer and a gradient adjustment layer, chose my colors from blue to a deep yellow orange, placed it in a multiply layer on top of my image, and a multiply allows me to see through it. It would be very much like laying in a thin transparent wash over your initial drawing if you were painting traditionally in oils. Again, I try to approach a digital painting very much the same way I would if it were a traditional approach. From there, what you're seeing me do now is lay in just base color. Again, as a multiply layer in my hierarchy, and I'm working from darks to lights. That's why it doesn't really look like it will in the finish, but I'm placing in what would be considered the undertoned colors that I am going to reproduce later. And some of these very thin, transparent darks will show through in my painting stage that give it some of that depth. The brushes that I use digitally also can emulate the appearance of thick opasto paint from time to time. So I want, just like I would in oil, as I get lighter and lighter in value, I want my paint to appear thicker and thicker and more opaque. And so very much the way I teach my students when it comes to painting, I teach also the appearance for illustration and digital painting. Keep shadows nebulous, keep them transparent. Remember, spiritually, if you think of it even this way, shadows represent darkness. They represent something where there's not any information. So try not to put too much information in the shadows. The information is in the light. So let the light have more attention, let the light have more, in this case, medium thickness in paint, or greater detail and brushwork for interest in the lights also. Please enjoy continuing to watch as I transition, and I will bring up any highlights that need to be talked about. Here you can see me giving a little bit more attention as I build up the lights from the dark values and undertones that I've already laid in. I'm working with a series of brushes. I probably have too many brushes open. Normally, the way I would paint, I had a number of brushes open that I was sharing with the students in this workshop, so that's probably why there's so many open. But you can see a little bit of the detail here. This is another one of the great advantages of working digitally, how I can blow the image up, super detailed, back up, take a look at it overall, get close again. If I'm doing this on my easel, I'm really only allowed to get as big as I can get close to the painting using very small brushes. This helps speed up the painting process, and it also can sometimes be a crutch for students, especially those beginning digital painters, because they can put so much detail into an image. They sometimes overwork the project. It's much better to paint from what I call vague to detail. I tease a lot describing as it having a conversation as if it were with the tax auditor. Be vague until specificity is needed. It's nothing more than don't put too much information out there. When we're viewing things, when we're watching things, when we're looking at things, we tend to look only at specific details at a time. Not realizing, and if you'll quickly observe while you do that, that the things in your periphery are there, they're recognizable to a certain extent, but we're not seeing them in detail. And as an artist, if you place detail over every part of the painting, you tend to have your viewer give every part of the painting equal value. Whereas in a narrative, especially in a painting where you're trying to use, sometimes the background is nothing more than support for the main action or the main narrative or even the character in the foreground. If you give the background just as much detail, I'm going to look at everything in the background. Now, I know that's fascinating because you can, and it sometimes is distracting, but it also will, in many ways, weaken the overall impact of the finished painting. So really try to avoid adding too much detail in the painting while you're working on it. Just enough to give, in this case, I want, this is being used as a demonstration for a splash page to introduce the character. So I want you to be able to see the character, his personality, but also enough to know about the clothing, the costuming that this character is wearing, so you would have a better understanding if you were going to have to recreate this for an animation, or if you're going to have to take this character to a greater finish or be reused and repainted by others on a team over and over again. There's enough information here for detail that you can see what it is, but still artistically make it look interesting. Working digitally gives you many attributes, uh, and it can be like working with paint that is wet, or I can instantaneously change and add a new layer and make the paint dry. I can then choose to go back into a specific layer and paint it as if it's wet again. So this is one of the ways that it helps speed up the process of the painting and the drawing. You're also getting ready to see me start painting on the sword. And right now you're just seeing my initial drawing of the sword with what goes through the sword, all the information that's behind the sword. I am using the polygonal selection tool to outline the sword. To isolate it, I quickly dropped in some gray color and now some modeling for the sword itself. And I can also add a new layer and turn it into a clip mask to this particular object that I've selected. And it will allow me to get in there in detail with hard edges without having to worry about the blurred edges of paint, something that's very difficult to do traditionally. Time to start working on my face again. Here you can see where I've brought my reference over. I've already done a quick lay-in of just some basic skin tones. If you look to the upper right, you'll see my limited palette that I used and put together primarily and selected from an old master's painting just to give me a quick general harmony for painting. There's any number of ways to limit your palette. You can work from traditional mediums and traditional palettes such as the Zorn palette. I teach a number of different color styles when I'm introducing oil paint so as not to make the color aspect of painting too complex. I primarily work in value and then I work in color temperature from warm to cool. Here is me working on the hand. You can see, particularly in this very kind of close-up approach, how I would apply the buildup of darker to lighter colors, just like I would if it were an oil painting. Quickly, using my limited palette over there, basically keeping a harmony going. Slowly working from the dark colors, step up, and step up, and then step up in value each time. I'm also working from cool to warm. I lay the cool colors of the lighter versions down first, and then I will start warming them up as if the light is hitting that surface. Modeling this hand in a way that allows it to have volume and form and strength and solidity, and at the same time working with the illusion of warm light from an unseen lamp somewhere. And you'll see the shadows tend to be much cooler. Not blue, but cooler than the key light or the warm light lighting the subject. The painting is getting closer and closer towards the finish. You can see that I've pretty well completed the body, the figure, the feet, the cast shadow itself now. And now I'm just getting ready to sign the piece. It's been a pleasure being able to join you this quickly. I would love to be able to work with you again and show you some more of my approaches to painting. Some of my workshops are much more technically intuitive. This is just showing over a 4.5-hour period, compressed as quickly as possible, some of the approaches that I took in making this character come to life. Please feel free to visit my website at mikewimmer.com to take a look at some of my other projects, blog, and some of the things I've been working on from time to time. Thanks again.